You would never have guessed that in Cristiano Ronaldo's very own store, a shocking reality awaited him. His adoptive daughter being humiliated, sparking a quest for justice that would change everything. The first thing Sophia noticed was the water. It trickled through the floorboards above, a steady, mocking rhythm that matched her racing pulse. Below her feet, the basement was already ankle-deep, and outside the storm raged with an intensity that made the windows shudder. The beam of her flashlight caught her younger brother's face in the darkness. He was dragging the last of their photo albums toward the stairs, his expression hardened into something she barely recognized. "The river's breached the levee," he said, his voice oddly flat. "Mr. Nichols just called. They're evacuating the east side." Sophia nodded, numb. The east side, where Cristiano lived, where her sister was supposed to be spending the weekend with her adoptive father, her father who hadn't answered his phone in 3 hours. "We need to go get Sarah," her brother said, not a question, but a declaration. The lights flickered once, then plunged the basement into darkness. Only her flashlight beam remained, illuminating the rising water now halfway up their shins. "We can't," Sophia whispered, though the words felt like betrayal. "The roads to the east side will be underwater." The emergency broadcast said, "I don't care what they said." His voice cracked as he cut her off. "She's 12, Sophia, and Dad won't, he doesn't—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. They both knew Cristiano's patterns too well. Another crack of thunder shook the house, and a fresh surge of water poured through from above. Something heavy crashed upstairs, maybe the old oak tree finally giving way, the one she'd been meaning to have removed for years. Sophia grabbed her brother's arm, her decision solidifying like ice in her veins. "Get the emergency kit and put it in the truck. I'll find the life vests." As he splashed toward the stairs, Sophia's phone vibrated in her pocket. The screen lit up with a text, not from Cristiano, but from Sarah. "Water coming in. Dad's not home. Please, Sophia." The 3 words sent a wave of terror and resolve through Sophia that dwarfed the rising flood. 20 minutes later, Sophia's old pickup truck was crawling through what had once been Maple Street. The rain was so heavy she could barely see beyond the hood, even with the wipers working frantically. Her brother sat beside her, clutching the dashboard as she navigated around a submerged sedan. "Turn left here," he directed, his eyes fixed on the GPS mapping their route to Cristiano's riverside condo. "If we stay on higher ground, we might—" The truck lurched suddenly as something large and unseen rammed into the passenger side. Water began pouring in through the door seams. He swore, pressing himself against the center console. "We have to go back," he said, panic finally breaking through his determined facade. But Sophia had already shifted into reverse, backing away from whatever debris had struck them. Her hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, not without Sarah. As they turned onto River Road, the full devastation of the flood came into view. Streetlights reflected off what was now essentially a lake, punctuated by the tops of submerged cars and the upper stories of homes. And ahead, the dark silhouette of Cristiano's building, still standing but surrounded by churning water. Sophia could see flashlight beams moving in some of the upper windows. People trapped, waiting for rescue. The truck began to float. "We can't drive any further," Sophia said, already reaching for the life vests in the back seat. "We'll have to swim." Her brother looked at her, rain streaming down his face from where it blew in through the half-open window. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to hide behind her legs when meeting strangers, not the young man who had been pulling away from her for the past 2 years. "I'm a better swimmer," he said quietly. "You stay with the truck." "I'll get her." Before Sophia could respond, a rescue boat rounded the corner, its searchlight sweeping across the flooded street. The 2 uniformed officers aboard spotted them immediately, changing course toward the truck. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate now," one shouted through a megaphone. "This area is dangerous. The current is picking up." "My sister's in there," Sophia pointed toward Cristiano's building. "Apartment 3B, she's alone." The officers exchanged looks. "We'll check it out, but you need to come with us now. The water's still rising." Her brother's hand found hers, squeezing so hard it hurt. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "It's not like before. You don't have to be the one who saves everyone this time." 5 years earlier, Cristiano Ronaldo had still been the center of Sofia's world, her adoptive father, the charismatic football star whose ambition had propelled their family into Madrid's upper-class circles. Their elegant home, with its view of the city, had been the venue for gatherings where Cristiano charmed colleagues and potential business partners alike. Sofia, with her determined spirit and quiet confidence, had been the supportive daughter, the organized sister, the talented student whose academic achievements made her adoptive father proud. What no one saw were the cracks beneath the surface: Cristiano's increasing absences due to his career demands, the way Sofia had become expert at covering for him with her younger siblings. "Dad promised to take me to practice today," her brother had complained on a bright Saturday morning, already dressed in his football gear, ball-propped by the door. Sofia had glanced toward Cristiano's room, where he was still resting after returning late from an international match. "Dad's exhausted from his trip," she'd said, the familiar explanation tasting bitter. "But I'll take you." Her brother had shrugged, disappointed but not surprised. "You don't play like he does." "Then you'll teach me." She'd ruffled his dark hair, so like Cristiano's, "and we'll pick up Sarah from her dance class on the way back." That day, at the practice field, had been unexpectedly perfect. Her brother, proud to be the expert for once, had shown her some of the techniques Cristiano had taught him. They'd practiced for hours and enjoyed every minute, sharing the sandwiches she'd hastily made and watching other young players on nearby fields. Sarah had joined them later, her blonde hair still in its ballet bun, chattering about pirouettes and plies. The three of them had played a casual game, carefree in a way that had become increasingly rare. Cristiano had been concerned when they returned, not because they'd gone without him, but because Sofia had taken her brother to practice, without professional supervision. "He could have been injured," he'd explained after the children were in bed. "You don't know the proper training techniques." "They needed you today," she'd responded, her voice level despite the frustration building inside. "I was just filling in. Again." "I travel constantly to provide the best for this family," Cristiano had replied, the familiar explanation unfolding like a well-rehearsed speech. One missed practice isn't going to hold him back. But it wasn't just one practice, and they both knew it. It was dance recitals watched through a phone screen while Cristiano attended sponsorship events. It was school projects completed with Sofia's help because Cristiano was too busy or traveling. It was a pattern of presence without being present. The watershed moment had come 3 months later. Sofia had been at school when she'd received a call from Cristiano's assistant. There had been an incident. Sarah had been left waiting at her ballet school for hours because the driver had received the wrong instructions, and Cristiano was unreachable at a photo shoot in another country. The assistant had been apologetic, but frantic. "Miss Sofia, your sister is very upset. The school is closing and there's no one to take her home." She'd picked up Sarah from the ballet school, the little girl confused and frightened. "Daddy forgot me," she'd whispered. "He promised he would watch my rehearsal today." That night, after getting the children settled, Sofia had video called Cristiano. His handsome face had been tight with guilt and defensiveness. "It was a miscommunication," he'd insisted. "I'll speak with the staff. It won't happen again." "You keep missing their important moments," Sofia had replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "They need you here, not just your name or your money." "I would never neglect our family," Cristiano had said, looking genuinely hurt. Sofia had felt her resolve weaken. "Not intentionally, but your career demands are putting everything else second, including us." The conversation had led to changes. Cristiano had reorganized his schedule to spend more time at home, had hired more household help, had even considered retiring earlier than planned. Sofia had taken on more responsibility in managing the family's day-to-day life, becoming almost a co-parent rather than just an older sister. The younger children had adjusted to the new normal, though her brother had increasingly shown his frustration as he entered his teens, while Sarah remained desperate for her father's approval and attention. Cristiano's career demands had ebbed and flowed with the seasons, but his reliability hadn't consistently improved. He'd miss school events, forget about special occasions, schedule business trips during important family weekends. Each time Sophia would step in, rearranging her life to buffer her siblings from their father's inconsistency. "You don't have to keep covering for him," her friend from the orphanage had told her during one late-night phone call, after Sophia had cancelled their plans to take Sarah to a birthday party when Cristiano forgot. "I'm not covering for him," Sophia had insisted. "I'm looking after my brother and sister." But as the years passed, she'd begun to wonder if her constant compensation for Cristiano's absences was really helping anyone. Her brother had grown increasingly resentful of their father and distant from Sophia, as if her efforts to maintain family stability were somehow complicit in Cristiano's behavior. Sarah had developed an anxious need to please, particularly with Cristiano, whose approval seemed perpetually just out of reach. And Sophia herself had remained frozen in place, not moving forward, just managing each crisis as it came, defined by her role as the family's steadying force. Until the night of the flood, when everything she thought she knew about strength and sacrifice would be washed away. The rescue boat cut through the churning water. Sophia and her brother huddled under emergency blankets as the officers navigated toward Cristiano's building. The rain had somehow intensified, striking the water's surface with such force that it created a constant mist above the flood. "Radio says the dam upstream is showing signs of stress," one officer shouted to his partner. "If it goes, we've got tea. Maybe 20 minutes before the surge hits here." Sophia's heart contracted. 20 minutes to find Sarah and get to higher ground. 20 minutes before a wall of water could sweep through what remained of their neighborhood. As they approached the building, she could see people gathered on the second-floor landing of the exterior stairwell, waving frantically. The boat pulled alongside, and the officer at the helm called out, "We're evacuating. Anyone needing immediate medical attention?" A middle-aged woman pushed forward. "There's a girl alone up on the third floor, apartment 3B. The stairwell between the second and third floors is damaged. We couldn't reach her." Her brother was on his feet before the officer could respond. "That's my sister." "Sir, please stay." "Seated," the officer began, but he had already thrown off his life vest and was wading through the water toward the building's entrance. "Wait," Sophia screamed, lunging to follow him, but the second officer caught her arm. "Ma'am, it's not safe. We have equipment." But Sophia pulled free, her eyes locked on her brother's form as he pushed through the waist-deep water into the building's lobby. "He doesn't know about the electrical systems," she gasped. "The building, if there's live wires—" The officers exchanged grim looks. Then the one at the helm secured the boat to the stairwell railing. "I'll go after him," he said to his partner. "Start getting these people aboard." Sophia didn't wait for permission. She plunged into the flood after the officer, the cold water stealing her breath as she fought her way toward the entrance, where her brother had disappeared. Inside, emergency lights cast an eerie glow over the flooded lobby. The elevator was obviously inoperable, and the main stairwell entrance showed signs of structural damage, with pieces of drywall floating in the murky water. Her brother was already halfway up the stairs, the officer close behind him. Sophia followed, her soaked clothes weighing her down as she climbed. When they reached the second-floor landing, the damage became clear. A large section of the ceiling had collapsed, along with part of the third-floor staircase. There was a gap of at least 6 feet between the intact portion of the stairs and the third-floor hallway. Her brother stood at the edge, calling out, "Sarah, Sarah, it's me." A small voice responded from somewhere down the third-floor corridor. "I'm here. The door's stuck." The officer assessed the gap. "We need to find something to bridge this," he said, his voice professional but urgent. Her brother was already moving, pulling a long bench from the second-floor common area. "This might reach," he said, his voice strained with effort as he positioned it across the gap. Sophia watched in horror and pride as her brother tested the makeshift bridge, distributing his weight carefully before committing to cross. The bench creaked but held as he made his way to the third-floor hallway. "Stay there," the officer instructed Sophia. "We'll bring her to you." Sophia nodded, her hands pressed against her mouth as she watched her brother disappear down the corridor. The officer followed, the bench wobbling precariously under his heavier frame. Minutes stretched like hours as Sophia waited, listening to the ominous sounds of the building shifting around her and the water still rising below. Then finally she heard her brother's voice. "Sophia, we got her!" Sarah appeared in the hallway, pale and trembling, her blonde hair plastered to her face. Her brother had his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the makeshift bridge. The officer followed, his expression grim. "The bench won't hold all three of us," he said. "The girl needs to go first, then the boy." Sarah hesitated at the edge, her eyes wide with fear as she looked down at the gap below. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sophia called to her. "Just like the balance beam in gymnastics, remember? I'm right here." Sarah nodded, took a deep breath and began to inch across the bench. It shifted slightly under her weight, but she kept moving, her eyes fixed on Sophia. When she was close enough, Sophia reached out and pulled her sister the rest of the way, clutching her tightly against her chest. Sarah was shaking uncontrollably, her skin cold to the touch. "Dad never came home," she whispered into Sophia's neck. "I kept calling him, but he didn't answer, and then the water started coming in, and It's okay," Sophia soothed, though nothing was okay. "You're safe now, he's coming and we're getting out of here." Her brother was halfway across the bench when a terrible groaning sound filled the stairwell. The building seemed to shudder, and the bench shifted again, more dramatically this time. "Hurry!" The officer called, but it was too late. With a crack that echoed like a gunshot, the bench split in the middle. Her brother lunged forward, managing to grab the edge of the landing where Sophia and Sarah stood. Sophia dropped to her knees, gripping her brother's wrists as his legs dangled over the gap. Sarah screamed, and the officer shouted something from across the void. But all Sophia could focus on was her brother's terrified face and the impossible weight of him as gravity threatened to tear him from her grasp. "I've got you," she gasped, muscles straining, fingernails digging into his skin. "I've got you." For a moment that contained eternity, they hung suspended between rescue and disaster. Then, summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Sophia pulled backward, dragging her brother upward until his torso was on the landing and he could scramble the rest of the way to safety. The three of them collapsed against each other, a tangle of limbs and relieved sobs as the officer called across, "The building's becoming unstable. You need to get down to the boat now." As Sophia helped her siblings to their feet, a new voice crackled over the officer's radio. "All units. Dam breach confirmed. Repeat, dam breach confirmed. Surge expected to hit downtown in 15 minutes. Evacuate immediately to designated safe zones." 15 minutes. Sophia looked at her siblings' faces, at the fear and trust reflected there, and made a silent promise. Not this time. This time they would all make it out together. The boat fought against the strengthening current as they pulled away from the building, now crowded with the rescued residents. Sophia kept her arms around Sarah and her brother, unable to let go even as the officer handed out additional emergency blankets. "Where's Dad?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice small beneath the roar of the outboard motor and the relentless rain. "Did they get him out too?" Sophia exchanged a glance with her brother, who looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered, honestly. "But the emergency services are evacuating everyone. I'm sure he's—" She was interrupted by the second officer, who was speaking into his radio. "Repeat your location," he was saying urgently. "We're on River Road heading to evacuation point Charlie." He listened for a moment, then turned to his partner. "There's a man trapped on the roof of a vehicle at the intersection of River and Oak. Fire rescue can't reach him before the surge hits." "That's near Dad's store," her brother said, suddenly sitting upright. "He works late on Fridays." Sophia felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Cristiano, who hadn't answered his phone. Cristiano, who would have been driving home along River Road. Cristiano, who still, after everything, was their father. She caught the officer's eye. "Can we check? It might be our father." The officer hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and compassion. "Ma'am, our priority is getting you all to the evacuation point. The surge—" "Please," Sophia said quietly. "He's our father." After a moment, the officer nodded to his partner, who adjusted their course. As they rounded the bend toward the intersection, the boat's spotlight caught a figure perched atop a partially submerged luxury sedan. Even from a distance, Sophia recognized Cristiano's broad shoulders and the gesture he made as he waved desperately for help. Sarah gasped. "It's Dad! Dad!" she called out, her voice carrying over the water. Cristiano turned at the sound, his face illuminated in the boat's light. Relief and shock registered as he spotted his family among the rescuers. The officers maneuvered the boat alongside the car, which was now only visible from the roof up. Cristiano was soaked and shivering, a gash visible on his forehead. "The road was clear," he stammered as they helped him aboard. "Then suddenly there was water everywhere. The car was swept. I couldn't—" His eyes met Sophia's over Sarah's head as their sister threw herself into his arms. There was something in his gaze she hadn't seen in years, a raw vulnerability. That stripped away the facade of confidence he'd always maintained. Her brother remained seated beside Sophia, his expression unreadable as he watched his father and sister. "We need to move now," the officer at the helm shouted. "The surge is coming!" As if in response, a distant roar became audible beneath the storm, the sound of a massive volume of water rushing toward them. The boat's motor whined as the officer opened the throttle fully, and they shot forward, leaving the remains of Cristiano's car to disappear beneath the rising flood. Sophia held tight to her brother with one arm, her other hand finding Cristiano's where he clutched Sarah. Their eyes met again over their siblings' heads, and in that moment of shared terror and desperate hope, Sophia felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition. Whatever had been broken between them as father and daughter, they remained connected by the young lives huddled between them. The evacuation point was a chaotic scene of emergency vehicles, floodlights and shocked residents wrapped in blankets. Medical personnel moved through the crowd, attending to the injured and hypothermic. As they disembarked from the boat, a paramedic immediately approached, noting Cristiano's head wound. "Sir, you need medical attention," she said firmly, already, guiding him toward a nearby ambulance. Cristiano resisted, looking back at Sarah, who clung to his hand. "My daughter." "We're right here," Sophia said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "Let them help you. We'll stay together." The next hours passed in a blur of medical checks, registration with emergency services, and the gradual realization that their home, Sophia's carefully maintained sanctuary for herself and her siblings, was likely destroyed by the flood. As dawn broke, the rain finally began to ease. They sat together on cots in the high school gymnasium that had been converted to a shelter, Sarah finally asleep between them, her brother dozing fitfully on Sophia's other side. "They told me our neighborhood is completely underwater," Cristiano said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. His head wound had required stitches, and he looked older than his years. "The house, everything, it's gone." Sophia nodded, too tired for pretense or comfort. "They think some structures might be standing, but the first floors are destroyed. All those photo albums you helped me save," she added to her brother, who had opened his eyes at the sound of their voices. "All gone anyway." "Not all of them," he murmured. "Not the important ones." Cristiano looked at his son, hesitation and shame evident in his expression. "Son, I should have been there, for all of you. Not just tonight, but—" "Don't," he interrupted, his voice low but intense. "Not now. Not because you're scared or grateful or whatever this is. If you want to change things, do it when this is over, when it's harder." Cristiano flinched but nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right." He glanced at Sophia. "Both of you have been right for a long time. I just couldn't see it." Sarah stirred between them, her eyes blinking open. "Are we home yet?" she asked, drowsily. Sophia smoothed her sister's tangled hair. "Not yet, sweetheart, but we're together, that's what matters." As Sarah drifted back to sleep, Sophia found herself contemplating the weight of water, how it could destroy foundations, sweep away the structures of entire lives, yet also cleanse and create space for something new to emerge. The flood had taken their homes, their possessions, nearly their lives. But in its wake, she sensed the possibility of rebuilding. Not the same structures as before, but something more honest, maybe even stronger. The work would be hard. The damage was real. But as she sat with her siblings and the man who had been their father, Sophia understood that some things, once submerged, could still be salvaged.